Hi, Mr. Washington here. Today we're going to talk about what a polynomial is. A polynomial is an expression that can have constants, variables, and exponents. That's a very informal definition. For a more formal definition, a quick Google search will give you that. Characteristics of polynomials, typically we don't define things with what they can't be, but in this case it's probably easier. Polynomials cannot have negative exponents. Negative exponents is also when we divide by a variable. Polynomials cannot have fractional exponents. We cannot have the square root of a variable, which would result in fractional exponents. And polynomials cannot also not have an infinite number of terms. An example of a polynomial would be something like y equals negative 2 x squared plus 4x minus 3. Another example would be something like y equals 5. And one more example would be something like y equals x to the 4th minus 7x squared plus the square root of 2 x. Notice the square root is not on the x, it's only on the 2, which is okay. The exponent here would be a 1, which is not fractional or negative. Non-examples would result in fractional exponents, negative exponents, or an infinite number of terms. So y equals 5x to the negative 2 would not be a polynomial because we have a negative exponent. Dividing by a variable, so something like y equals 7 over x, would also not be a polynomial because this would be equivalent to 7x to the negative 1. So anytime we divide by a variable, it's equivalent to negative exponents. If we had something like fractional exponents, that also would not be something like negative 2x to the 1/2. That would also not be a polynomial because that is a fractional exponent. We could also have something like y equals 5 times the square root of x, and since that's under the radical, the variable is under the radical, we can rewrite that as 5x to the 1/2 power, and because that's a fractional exponent, that too would not be a polynomial. The last type of polynomial would have an infinite number of terms, and that would look something like this. Y equals x plus x squared plus x to the 3rd plus, and we would denote infinite number of terms with the dot, dot, dot. Since we know what a polynomial is, let's talk about the parts. Terms. The parts of a polynomial that are being added or subtracted are called the terms. The coefficients. If a term has a variable, the number in front of the variable is the coefficient of that variable. Each coefficient has the sign of the number, the sign in front of it. So if there is no number written, there's an invisible 1 there. Constants. If a term has no variables, that term is considered a constant. The constant takes on the sign in front of it. The term with the highest exponent is known as the leading term. This is going to be very important in algebra. The leading coefficient is the coefficient that's attached to the leading term. We will be using this number a lot in Algebra 2 this year. The degree of the polynomial is the exponent of the leading term. Just put that in other words, it is the highest exponent, or the greatest exponent is considered the degree of the polynomial. Let's look at an example of a polynomial. 5x to the 3rd plus 7x squared minus 6x plus 2. This polynomial has 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Remember, terms are separated by plus or minus signs. The coefficients would be the numbers in front of our variables, 5, 7, and negative 6. The constant term would be the term without a variable, and in this case, the constant term is 2. The leading term is the first number. The term with the biggest exponent would be 5x to the 3rd. The leading coefficient would be the coefficient attached to that, in this case a positive 5. The degree would be the highest exponent of that leading term, which is 3. The exponent there is 3, so the degree would be 3. Now that we've talked about the degree and number of terms of a polynomial and the parts of a polynomial, we can now talk about naming polynomials. Polynomials are named according to their degree and number of terms. If the degree is 0, that is a constant. That would look something like y equals 5. There's no exponent, so that's a constant term, no variable. 1 would be linear. Linear looks something like y equals x. X to the first power would be linear. If the degree is 2, that would be a quadratic, and that would be something like y equals x squared. If the degree is 3, that would be cubic, and that would be y equals x to the third. If the degree is 4, we call that quartic, and that would be y equals x to the fourth. So x to the fourth would be the leading term, 4 would be the biggest exponent. And 5, we call that quintic, and that would be something like y equals x to the fifth. Anything bigger than 6, we just call a polynomial of degree n, n being the degree, greater than or equal to 6. We can also name polynomials based on the number of terms. If the polynomial has 1 term, we call that a monomial. If the polynomial has 2 terms, we call that a binomial. And if the polynomial has 3 terms, we call that a trinomial. Anything bigger, we call a polynomial with n terms, n being the number of terms the polynomial has, greater than or equal to 4.